Sometimes Chardonnay, when it's in the wrong site or if it's too hot, really sheds acidity quickly, so you can have these really kind of fat, clunky wines. But this site, being on the side of the mountain, really tends to maintain acidity really well, which is great. This is Vendemmia Chardonnay, or what we call Chuy Chardonnay, for Chuy or Daz, who farms this vineyard. Really, really unique Chardonnay site in that it's very old. It was planted in the early 70s. It's a dry farmed. It's on the side of the mountain, and it's Shotberry Wente clone. So we picked some of this very early for under the wire for sparkling wine, and then this year, starting this year in 2016, we're actually going to make Chardonnay from it for Bedrock as well, which will be our first Chardonnay that we've made since 2010 from Brosseau Vineyard. I was waiting to find the perfectly right Chardonnay vineyard to make Chardonnay, and this just seems to be it. And the wine is just finished fermentation, and it smells fantastic. 1973, I believe, is when this was planted. So very old by California Chardonnay standards. They knew about Chardonnay as far back as the 1880s. I think they didn't like growing it because it has such small clusters that you don't get a huge crop off of it. So you really saw this prominence of Chardonnay starting to happen starting in the 1950s with Hansel, which is just on this mountain but a little farther south from here, and then people like Stony Mountain and Mayacamas started making it as well. But really the 50s and the 60s and then into the 70s was really when you started seeing Chardonnay being made, and then it just exploded in the 80s and 90s, and now I believe it's the second most consumed variety from California after Cabernet. So it's planted everywhere now. This clone of Chardonnay is called Shotberry Wente clone, and it's known, and this is second crop, so it's even smaller than it typically would be, and it's very late in the season. But you can see, like, that's a normal size berry, and then all these tiny little ones are shot berries. And the hallmark of this clone, Shotberry Wente clone, is that it has all of these tiny little berries, which really, it creates a greater skin to juice ratio. So it creates more concentration in the finished wines because there's more skins to less juice. So a typical cluster would be about, maybe 3 or 4 times this size. But this does give you an idea of what the Shotberry does, which is kind of cool. So we picked earlier for sparkling because the key variable in sparkling wine is that you have to induce a secondary fermentation to get the bubbles in the bottle, basically, because all the bubbles in sparkling wine come from individual fermentations in every single bottle of sparkling wine when you do a method champenoise. So that means that you really don't want to have a finished alcohol much higher than 10.5 or 11% in the base wine, because if it gets too high, it'll create too stressful of an atmosphere for the yeast trying to do the secondary fermentation, and then the secondary fermentation won't go through, and then you kind of have a disaster on your hands. We actually push the envelope compared to most sparkling houses because we really want to maximize as much flavor as we can get out of the vineyard. So we're really sort of pushing the limits when it comes to how late we're picking, because Chardonnay, so we're picking out here about 18.5 to 19 bricks, and then we're picking at about 22.5 for standard, our standard Chardonnay. And our standard Chardonnay will finish at about 13.5% alcohol, while the other will finish at about 11 to 11.5%. This year it's split between us, Tadeo Borchardt, I believe for his own label, Camino, and then Lioco gets it as well. So it's fun to have those 3 different expressions coming out of the vineyard. It should also be noted that we all pick on the exact same day for still wine. So if you go out and you find the 3 bottles, you can at least know that we all picked on the same day, essentially at the same sugar. So any difference that is after that is winemaking. So, you know, you can figure out which one of us fucked it up and which one of us did well. So I hope I'm not the one that fucked it up.